Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this presentation on feminism brought to you by the Women-Centered HIV Care Hub. For more information about the Women-Centered HIV Care Hub, we encourage you to visit our website or our social media, which if you search WCHC Hub online or on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, you can find us. I am Logan Kennedy, and I'll be beginning this presentation, and then my colleagues will introduce themselves as they go through their slides today. Before we begin, the Women-Centered HIV Care Hub always likes to take a moment to remind us that we should acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we are joining from today. Whether those are your lands where you live, you work, you play, or you learn, we have an important responsibility to understand the traditional ancestors of those lands, to understand details of the treaties or lack thereof, and understand what we can do if those of us who identify as settlers want to continue to work towards the calls to actions of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations. We also like to acknowledge the important and ongoing impact of racism in this country, including anti-Black racism, as well as anti-Indigenous racism. And all the work we do within the Women-Centered HIV Care Hub is in an effort to work to dismantle systems and work against systems that continue to perpetuate the negative impacts of racism on people on these lands, as well as throughout the world. As I mentioned, I will be starting today, and so I want to tell you a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, my name is Logan Kennedy. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a health equity researcher that focuses on women's sexual and reproductive health and rights, particularly of young women and girls. And this lens really informs how I conduct research, how I engage as a nurse, and also how I think about theory and the types of theories that we use to inform our research. I really think of understanding positionality as a reflexive process where I'm constantly trying to talk to others and learn about not only how my position impacts the way I engage as a researcher, but also to understand how positionality impacts those that I work with. And I hope today, as we have this discussion about feminism or feminisms, you might take the opportunity to think about your own positionality and to continue to understand how it influences your perspectives and understandings and experiences related to feminism. So we wanted to just start by taking a quick moment to define feminism, because our whole talk is about feminism. And for each of us, feminism might mean something slightly different. We think that focusing on a definition is foundational. So let's start with the simplest definition of feminism. So this is from the dictionary. And it says that according to the dictionary, feminism is the belief that women should be allowed the same rights, power, and opportunities as men, and that they should be treated in the same way. So this definition really emphasizes the concept of equality. So everybody gets the same things. However, it's also really important to think about broader or potentially more critical perspectives on feminism. So when I looked for a critical definition of feminism, it suggested that it's about creating a society where everyone can thrive as their authentic selves. This means affording all individuals the rights and the powers and the opportunities they need to succeed. So this definition is not talking about the same way, it's about giving people the things they need to succeed. And so I interpret this definition as being a little bit more focused on equity, which is not about equal, it's about giving people what they need to be successful. And so as we move forward today, in our talk, and as you take this new learning, hopefully, about feminism, I really do think it's important to consider how you're positioning your own understanding of feminism. Is it in terms of equity, or is it in terms of equality? So let's explore a little bit more about how we understand or classify feminism. And, it's not possible to get into a detailed history lesson on feminism. That's not the intention of today. But one thing that we do think is really important is for the viewers and the listeners to understand that there are different ways that feminism is classified or has been classified historically. And there are two common ones that we think would be helpful for you to have a basic understanding of. So the first is the concept of the waves of feminism, which my colleague, Dr. Loutfy, will talk about as the next speaker. And the second is feminist epistemology. which sounds like a really big word. But what we're going to talk about is really just this idea of how the feminism you might take up or might practice really thinks about the nature of knowledge and the nature of truth. So let's just spend a little bit more time talking about feminist epistemologies before I hand over to Mona. So again, as I previously mentioned, a feminist epistemology is really about how the type of feminism you might be taking up or using in practice, in life, in research, in advocacy, understands what we are talking about when we're talking about knowledge and evidence, and also the ways that that type of feminism believes we can kind of capture knowledge, whether that's through research and what types of research, whether that's through lived experience and what types of lived experience counts. And so most feminist epistemologies, most feminist perspectives on the nature of knowledge do actually challenge traditional ideas about, science is the right way and there's a gold standard of research. But overwhelmingly, there are still kind of three classifications of feminist epistemology. And these are feminist empiricism, standpoint feminism, and postmodern feminism. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into any of these other than to highlight that each of them does treat knowledge a little bit different, does look at how gender and sex influence the way knowledge is created or shared a little bit differently. And so it's important to understand, if you're taking up a feminist theory in your work, where it's situated within these broader classifications of feminism.
Thanks so much, Logan. That was a great background and foundation. And I love the way you called it feminisms, because there isn't one definition of feminism. And what's so nice about giving this talk all together is we're all bringing our own preferred theory or view of feminism. And again, really important to understand or for me to understand my positionality when I'm discussing what form of feminism really inspires me. I identify as a cisgender woman, also heterosexual, at least presenting. I actually use she and they pronouns. I identify as a settler born to immigrant parents who came from Egypt. I identify as a woman of color from Middle Eastern heritage, which really influences the type of feminism that I like to use. And I'm also educated and privileged as a researcher and infectious disease specialist. I'm really interested in the North American history of women's rights and feminism. And as Logan reviewed, it's often divided or described in 3 or 4 waves of feminism. The first wave of feminism really concentrated on voting rights, and a really important time point and event to know about for the first wave of feminism is the Seneca Falls Women Convention in July 1948, where 12 resolutions were made regarding primarily voting rights. Something that's important to understand is that there were no Black women at this event. There was one Black man, Frederick Douglass. The second wave of feminism really concentrated on equal pay, as well as sexual and reproductive health and rights, particularly the right to contraception. And I'm sure you've all heard of Gloria Steinem, and she's really one of the main figures of the second wave of feminism. Again, important to realize that Black women were left out of the second wave of feminism. And this was also happening at the same time as the civil rights movement, and which was really with Black men at the forefront. The third and fourth wave of feminism, which we are in right now, is really about breaking down patriarchy. We've all heard of and are a part of the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement, Say Her Name, as well as continued fights for people's sexual and reproductive health rights, particularly women and that of gender diverse people. So where this takes me is what really inspires me is Black women feminism. And probably one of the most historic Black feminists is Sojourner truth. You should know about the amazing speech and famous speech she made at the 1951 Women's Right Convention in Akron, Ohio, called "Ain't I a Woman?" It's a foundational contribution and probably one of the first speeches that mentions and describes intersectionality that the next speaker is going to discuss. And I just want to go through in the 1800s and early 1900s, there were a lot of other really incredible Black women feminists that you can see listed there. Another document that you really should read is the Combahee River Collective. This is a collective of Black women feminists in North America, and the collective was founded in 1974 to address the unique challenges faced by Black women whose experiences were often marginalized both in the feminist and anti-racist discourse, as I reviewed. They wrote the Combahee River Collective Statement published in 1977. Again, another prelude to intersectionality. These are other Black feminist books I think you should read. One of the first ones is by Angela Davis, Women, Race, and Class. Next slide. My favorite author, Bell Hooks. Her first book was called "Ain't I a Woman?" And if you can imagine, she wrote it at the age of 19. And here's a quote: "No other group in America has so had their identity socialized out of existence as have Black women. When Black people are talked about, the focus tends to be on Black men. When women are talked about, the focus tends to be on white women." This is my favorite book. I think everyone should read it. Feminism is for everybody. Simple quote: "Simply put, feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression." Audre Lorde has a collection of essays and speeches, which is a really masterful combination. And from the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. From Age, Race, Class, and Sex, Women Redefining Difference. It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Your silence will not protect you. Patricia Hill Collins is really thought to have written the textbook on intersectionality. And you can see it there. I recommend reading it. And another incredible book she wrote is Black Feminist Thought, where it's written: "Oppressed groups are frequently placed in the situation of being listened to only if we frame our ideas in the language that is familiar to and comfortable for a dominant group. This requirement often changes the meaning of our ideas and works to elevate the ideas of the dominant groups." Why does Black feminism resonate with me? Really, it has to do with my identity as a woman of color. It really was described well in this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibrahim Kendi, where it really made me understand the intersection of my experience of ethnic racism and sexism. And these group of Black feminist women really spoke to me in terms of their writings.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Underhill. My pronouns are she and her. And today I really wanted to think about what was important to share with respect to this space, the work that I do, and my understanding of intersectional feminism, which Mona has gestured towards in her talk. So thanks for that, Mona. Many feminists point out that positioning oneself helps us reflect on where our knowledge has come from and where our gaps might be. So our different social positions and experiences, like our sex, our gender, our sexual orientation, and education, all influence what we know and don't know. And in her original intersectionality essay, Black feminist legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, who Mona also mentioned, observed that many white women identify their gender and other facets of their lives in their introductions, but they rarely mentioned that they're white. And that was a taken for granted assumption that differed from Black women. In comparison, Black women often mentioned their race in their introductions. And this also actually made me think about something that Logan has pointed out in previous women-centered HIV care meetings about how often in our spaces in HIV research, folks with HIV might disclose their status, but we don't often hear those without HIV doing the same. And these omissions might suggest what the norm or the presumed norm is. So these erasures are actually really important as they tell us about what we might need to reflect on. In thinking about this, I think it's important for me to share that I am a white cisgender woman and a settler on these lands. I'm pansexual, but I have the privilege of disclosing this when I want to and when I feel safe to do so, and that really shapes how I move through this world. This is important because I do a lot of work with two-spirit, trans, and gender diverse people, as well as folks who are from the LGBTQ+ community, and my experience as cis and read as heterosexual is markedly different than many of their experiences. I'm also not living with HIV, and I value learning from and partnering with communities so that we can learn from one another and really deepen our understandings, our analyses, and our reach. Lastly, I also wonder if feminism is actually a bit of a privilege to find as much as it is clearly born out of need. So I was raised in a place that really didn't value feminism for reasons ranging from misunderstandings, active sexism, and being in a general lower working class area where many folks really are just focused on trying to get by. Finding feminism through my education, reading widely, and interacting with new people gave me community, and it really afforded me the privilege of reflecting, changing my views, and doing things differently. So all of these positions that I hold relate to the idea of intersectionality or intersectional feminism. Intersectionality is a theory that explains how systems of oppression, such as sexism and racism, can come together to shape the social conditions, power, and experiences of individuals, communities, and oppressions. So as Mona gestured towards, the roots of intersectionality really began before Crenshaw coined the term. Crenshaw's work was critical, though, as it gave people language for the experiences that they had, and it also provided clear legal examples of how layered oppression and discrimination appears in and is perpetuated by our structural and legal systems. Today, I want to briefly go over the 3 examples from the US cases Crenshaw originally used to demonstrate how intersectional analysis can help us identify layered oppression and discrimination in systems. In Crenshaw's first example, she highlighted the case of DeGraffenreid versus General Motors. In this case, Black women were hired by General Motors later than Black men and white women. So later, when General Motors went to lay people off, Black women were majorly affected by the layoffs in comparison to white women and Black men, meaning a combination of long-term sexism and racism was contributing to the disparity. When the case went to court, though, the judge declared, "This lawsuit must be examined to see if it is race discrimination, sex discrimination, or either, but not a combination of both." This judge suggested that someone could not experience more than one form of oppression at the same time in a unique way. In the second example, Moore had evidence to suggest that Hughes Helicopter hired more men than women and more white women than Black women. Moore wanted to represent all women who were being affected, but the court declared that because Moore was Black, she could not represent all women, or rather, she could not represent white women. Given the limited data that she was then left with, her case was lost. In this ruling, Black women were determined to experience discrimination differently than white women, and it was strategically used to close the case in a way that went against Moore. In the final example, Payne versus Travenol, Payne presented a case about discrimination in compensation and promotions where white people, men and women, were being favored. The court declared Payne could not speak on behalf of Black men because Black women experienced discrimination differently. They went forward with the case, but it highlighted the divisive nature in Black activism because Black women were deemed to be fighting a different cause. These cases really highlight instances where Black women were legally put in positions where they were deemed to be different than white women and Black men, but they were also told that they could not claim this difference mattered. Yet the cases demonstrate that it's both, and scholars and activists since have demonstrated it can be both and more. People cannot be reduced into one category, their race or their gender, and those categories cannot classify all people who do fall within. Therefore, discrimination cannot be reduced to a single axis either. So although Crenshaw's original essay focused on gender and race, or rather the intersection of sexism and racism, she proposed that it laid the groundwork to consider how layered oppressions operate and control power and resources. And she declared, if efforts instead began with addressing the needs and problems of those who are most disadvantaged and with restructuring and remaking the world where necessary, then others who are singularly disadvantaged would also benefit. Since Crenshaw's original work, many folks have taken up intersectionality and shown how unique identities are systematically oppressed in our world in various ways, from social systems, education systems, medical systems, and more. Based on this framework, intersectionality must center social justice and transformation. And even when not focusing on the intersection of race and gender, intersectional analyses need to properly credit the Black feminists who really inspired this type of work. Intersectionality also requires ongoing reflexivity on researchers' part regarding their own histories, positionalities, and social contexts. It's impossible to do this without engaging with a wide range of people and their diversities and a wide range of knowledge sources. We don't know what we don't know. And if we only rely on the traditional ways of data collection and knowledge sources that are typically generated by white men, our source of information is very limited. Our experiences also don't represent the whole group that we might belong to. For instance, I certainly do not know the experiences of all women. And since this is the Women-Centered HIV Care Model Frameworks, Values, and Rights talk, I want to end by talking about how intersectionality inspired the WCHC model and subsequent work. Although the model was created based on data inclusive of diverse women from 3 provinces in Canada, including through efforts to recruit harder to engage folks or harder to reach folks, the Women-Centered HIV Care team has been adapting the model to consider the intersections and unique intersecting oppressions that might affect women living with HIV differently. We're working on understanding the model from the perspectives of Indigenous women and African, Caribbean, and Black women. And I'm really proud to have been a part of a study where we shared the Women-Centered HIV Care model with trans women and trans feminine people. Trans women experience higher rates of discrimination in the healthcare system, in part due to a lack of sex and gender diversity being taught in our education system. This is a systemic problem, and this, of course, shapes transphobia and trans antagonism. This all amounts to layered oppressions for trans women living with HIV, who therefore face sexism, cis-sexism, HIV stigma, and more when trying to access care. We recently published a manuscript on our findings, but just briefly, we identified a need to think more deliberately about what women's healthcare meant in the context of trans women and how it was originally conceptualized. And we were also presented with an opportunity to really think through how HIV care considerations may differ due to drug-drug interactions that trans women living with HIV may be more likely to experience. Thinking intersectionally then allows us to identify current gaps in knowledge and care delivery, allowing us to address them and increase care access for those who have the least.
Hi everyone, my name is Ndung'u, and I'll be speaking on transnational feminism and HIV from a lens of a service provider and a social worker. I come in this space as a mother, as a Black woman, and a settler from the eastern part of the African continent, and someone who has migrated in Canada, educated in Canada, and also in the continent of Africa. Thank you. So before I define transnational feminism, it's important to understand the term transnational, which is an umbrella concept that emerged as a way to name the dramatically increasing flow of people, things, images, and ideas across the borders of nation states in an era of globalization. And I quote Conway, 2019. So with that understanding, it's important to know that transnational feminism is a theoretical framework that I use within my work, and it examines gender inequalities in a global context scale and how colonialism, imperialism, and economic globalization shapes women's experiences, and also how they engage within the healthcare system. It also emphasizes the importance of solidarity and collaboration across borders among women, and it critiques the idea of single women's experience and acknowledges the diverse realities faced by women around the world. And so each woman is unique. And like the previous speaker spoke, we need to look at a women-centered approach. And transnational feminism also recognizes the diversity of women's experiences and avoids the one-size-fits-all approach. One-size-fits-all approach. The key concepts, I'll define this and I'll go and define also in an African context what the key concepts are. So Angela, the previous speaker, spoke about intersectionality. And so transnational feminism looks at intersectionality also, and it recognizes how race, class, gender, sexuality, and other factors interact to create unique experiences of oppression. It also looks at power dynamics, examining the unequal power relations between countries, cultures, and genders, and also emphasizes on global sisterhood, building solidarity among women, not just in a national context, but across borders to address shared challenges. So the key concepts in African feminist approaches are there's womanism, in which a Black feminist perspective, which centers the experiences of Black women and emphasizes their strength and resilience. And I quote Collins, 2000. The previous speaker, Mona, talked about how Black women have been marginalized in the previous feminism waves. And so it's important to look at Black women's perspectives that center their experiences. And also Logan talked about epistemology. So this also looks at epistemological diversity and valuing the knowledge and experiences of African women in shaping the feminist movement or theory. Sisterhood across borders, building solidarity. This is key with Black women globally. If it means in research, in programming, anything that you're doing, it's important to build the sisterhood across borders. African feminist scholars highlight the need to move beyond a one-size-fits-all approach, as I had mentioned earlier, and look at women as unique people. In terms of women living with HIV, it recognizes the experiences of African, Caribbean, and Black women living with HIV in developed countries such as this one, and how how their experiences are shaped by their race, where they come from, their ethnicity, their migration history, and the legacy of colonialism. And as social workers or, as service providers, it's important to be aware of these complexities as you're providing culturally sensitive and relevant support to women from ACB communities living with HIV. So how do I apply this within my role, or how can we apply it? Transnational feminism really provides valuable tools for social workers to better support women living with HIV. It fosters solidarity and, understanding the global context of the women's health, where they're coming from, and all the other intersectionalities. You can be able to contribute to a more just and equitable world for all women. It's also important because it will empower women by understanding their experiences. You can be able to advocate for them and also provide culturally competent healthcare and build partnerships also with community organizations that do support women living with HIV and understand the intersectionalities of these women. It also challenges and dismantles systemic inequalities and promotes social justice on a global scale. And advocating for women-centered solutions within organizations can help with, we push for policies and programming that's women-specific and promoting other relevant services. And it's also important to be aware of your positionality. We all talked about our positionality. So as a service provider, it's important to be aware of it all the time and practice reflexivity. So for Cultural informed practices, you can work together with local organizations to provide culturally relevant support services for racialized newcomer, refugee, and mental health supports, and also consider language barriers that affect how women engage in care. You can also create opportunities for women living with HIV to become leaders by providing training and providing spaces that are safe for fostering supportive networks within themselves. And as Mona mentioned, there are different movements such as this, the Women's Hub, there's the Me Too, Black Lives Matter movement, ICW, CPPN, which you can encourage women and, to join and allow them to share their experiences, their best practices, get resources from those networks, and create a united front, not just on a national, but on a global scale. And this is a case scenario that we can look at. So Asha is a 35-year-old Black woman who recently immigrated to Canada. She's HIV positive and feels isolated and overwhelmed navigating the healthcare system in a new country. Her husband was the sole provider of the family back home and is ill. Asha is unemployed and sends half of her social assistance income to her home country to support the family she left behind. And she loves cooking and would like to get a job as a cook. And she's convinced that she cannot get a job without Canadian experience. So how do we support Asha? So as a service provider or social worker, it's important to validate her concerns, build rapport and trust by demonstrating cultural sensitivity and understanding her concerns, where she's coming from, and noting that it's not just her issues in Canada, but also the issues back home are also affecting how she engages in care. So integrating those and having an understanding of all those pieces is important. Exploring Asha's desires, goals, and possibility of connecting with social support networks if she so desires, and also connecting her with other women, Black women living with HIV, to foster a sense of community. It's also important to advocate for Asha to access culturally appropriate treatment and supportive services, also provide resources where she can get further financial supports, or if it means food banks, being that she's sending money to support her family back home, you can explore other ways in which she can be able to get stuff like, to feed herself. And also if she's looking for employment, explore volunteer opportunities and career skills development opportunities. And also seek her permission and remain respectful if she doesn't want to connect with other community or Black women, and provide alternative resources. So it should be collaborative. It should not dismiss her concerns, and also be able to just meet her where she's at, and understand that her body might be in Canada, but she's also connecting from the home country she came from, and keeping those connections is important also for her mental and physical health. So in summary, healthcare providers can utilize transnational feminist principles to create a safe and supportive environment for women living with HIV. And this includes respecting the cultural beliefs and practices, addressing stigma associated with HIV in their communities, and advocating for their rights to access healthcare and social services. Also understand the majority of migrants retain and sustain ties with their countries of origin. Their culture, religion, and financial positions stay informed, and they stay connected to their country of origin. And these ties and past experiences from their countries of origin may impact health outcomes and well-being.